And with that, we begin a special recorded episode of Not Playing Politics. Unfortunately, life gets in the way as it often does. I believe the Beatles even wrote a song about it. But that being said, we're still here. We're still going to talk to y'all about what's going on today, and probably it'll still be happening tomorrow. Let's face it, things aren't changing all that often. But Nick, how the heck are you? And there's another reason that we're doing this. You've brought a friend with you today, haven't you?
Yeah, I have. Hey, good evening, Alex. Glad to be here. Wanted to take a chance so that we could share with everybody. Have a special guest with us tonight. A gentleman who has certainly been like a father figure for me. Someone who has a background, not only spent almost 2 decades in Washington, D.C., came out from graduating at Georgetown University and working within lobbying in Washington, and then went on to work in with defense contractors and other people as such. So I wanted to take an opportunity to introduce a fan of the show, Mr. Frank Toronto. Frank, thank you for joining us.
Hey, it's my pleasure. My pleasure. Really. As Nick was saying, I went to Washington, D.C. a long time ago when the President of the United States used 3 initials rather than a full name. And when JFK was elected, I was a Democrat. And then over the years, I slowly became an independent and then eventually became a Republican. But during the time I was in Washington, I worked as a lobbyist for a national business aircraft, representing the companies that owned and operated corporate aircraft. And during that time, I got to meet a lot of the congressmen and senators, as lobbyists will do, to try to influence in our favor. And because in national business was the business aircraft lobby, needless to say, our biggest opponent was the commercial line. So there was a lot of different rules that we wanted to get changed. So one of the things we did accomplish is that we got flight training onto the GI Bill. So any veteran who would like to can qualify for flight training. But more on a different vein, working in Washington, D.C. was really a very eye-opening experience for a young man from the back hills of Pittsburgh who was never really aware of what goes on in Washington. And Washington is another world, believe me. I got to meet the other side of congressmen and senators, not the faces you see on television, but the people who are really there, and their foibles, their good points, their intelligence, in some case, their lunacy, their ability to believe that they are the be-all to end-all. So it certainly opened my eyes a lot to politics. But I did gain quite a bit of an experience with her, and I think I can bring a new perspective to Alex and to Nick about how politics works today and what I think is going to happen based on what's already happened. So, gentlemen, it's been a pleasure to come to your show. I look forward to participating, and I'll turn it back over to Nick.
Yeah, thanks, Frank. I appreciate it. Like I said, something we've always talked about on the show is, the so what factor, right? We tried to drive this show as not just a complaining website screaming in the dark. We always want to have a level of contribution towards the solution of the problem. So really excited to have Frank join us tonight. And as always, we will not be bored by the events taking place in the world. Would you like to start domestically or internationally, my friend?
Well, first of all I have to say is I'll have your badge, Frank Toronto. Is that not the greatest police detective name, right? I mean, there's gonna be a movie made about that name eventually.
The gumshoes of the 1940s, right? The trench coat and the fedora coming in and saying it was a dark and stormy night, But anyway, yeah. So I mean, looking at the world right now, it's funny if we look externally and come from the outside in. Take it away, Alex. What are you seeing about what's going on in Israel?
I'm going to be honest. I kind of want to talk more about the cop thing. No, it's far less depressing than what's going on. So, okay. Well, so let's start with Israel, right? Because I think there's a theme there that goes a lot broader. And we could look at it and say, this is just your kind of typical Hezbollah lobbing rockets into Israel. This is what Hezbollah does, right? And that would be fair. Some people will say, well, oh, it's about this housing thing. No, it's not about the housing thing. It's not. That's 4 houses, and it was a private thing. It had nothing really to do with Israel or anything else. This is about a lot of things, but mostly it is about there was this is just how Hezbollah works. This is how the Palestinians work. This is their politics. No one has, unfortunately, in the Palestinian world, no one has ever hurt by trying to blow up some Jewish kid at a Sbarro pizza palace.
Well, I think we're looking at also, we're talking about Hezbollah and Hamas's engagement, right? So we want to look at and make sure that we acknowledge that, to your point, this is not just some short fuse that went off, right? This has been, now maybe this current event is, and it's tragic. On the outskirts, let's say from the beginning, this is tragic. Life lost in either direction is tragic. And it's because everyone thinks they're the good guy, right? Everyone wants to tell their story that they're the protagonist. But I think that the concept of this, we haven't, we're looking at withdrawing from Afghanistan. We're looking at doing this. We're looking at doing this. Oh, I guess things over there are resolved. I just don't think that that's an accurate assessment. And I think because it goes back to things, as you were saying, this goes back hundreds upon hundreds of years, thousands of years from a political perspective.
Okay. That is usually the phrase used by people who don't really want to pay attention to the situation. And here's what I mean by that. If you want to say that these people have been fighting forever, well, great. So did the Europeans until World War II. We are literally experiencing the longest
1960s. If you want, we can talk about the
that's war. That's really where we need to be, because again, right now Europe is experiencing the longest period of peace Europe's ever known. We could have said the same thing before World War II. What's going on in Israel and between Israel and the Palestinians is a new thing. But today, what we're talking about is the event that's occurring right now, the rockets that are coming in right now. That's not, people will try and say it's about this or it's about this. It's not. It is about the larger political system that the Palestinians have, that it is largely run by Hezbollah. You understand that Mahmoud Abbas is in like year 15 of a 4-year term?
Well, sure. Earlier today, actually, Frank and I were having a conversation before the show, and we were discussing different ways that when you look at some of these people making you use the title president, and then all of a sudden, President Xi is no longer looked at as a dictator. How is his rule there and the supreme authority he has any different than that of someone like Mao Zedong? If you look at someone
actually the same thing.
Look at Putin. He's done the same thing, where legislatively he's made it almost impossible for anyone to truly challenge him until 2036. Some of the reports, I believe, stories were coming out saying. I mean, by that point, he would have been in power for 35 years, 37 years. So one thing I think, we can do tonight with Frank here is, as someone that we say with reverence and respect, who recalled these events in real time, living through them. Frank, let me ask, what was the battle? What was 67 like, splitting these things up? What was that initial reaction?
Well, I think you're jumping a little too far ahead with this. What you have to realize is back in the late 50s and the early 60s, when the most important thing you had to worry about is what kind of Vaseline you wanted to put in your hair. Today now, kids are so involved, at least they think they're involved, because they start protesting things they don't quite understand. They try to disrupt everything because they believe it's racist, which is probably the single most detestable phrase in the world. But more importantly, what is going on, and you see it as Nick pointed out, power for Putin, power for Xi. Well, what you've got here in this country is the Democratic Party looking for that same kind of power. And how are they doing it? Well, they're doing it by flooding the country with illegal immigrants, or undocumented aliens. They're doing it by trying to pass H.R. 1, which will change the voting system of this country forever. They're looking and considering at packing the Supreme Court. And why are they doing all this? For the same reason Putin did it in Russia, Xi does it in China. The Democratic Party wants to be the powerful party, and it's all about power. And that power brings them great wealth. I mean, after all, Nancy Pelosi has her, $15 ice cream pints in her $25,000 refrigerator. That's what it's all about. The rest of us the hell with the middle class. The Democrats keep saying how they're working for them and they're concerned about them, but they're really not. They're really concerned about power. So in a world today, power becomes the ultimate goal. Now, what I like about Netanyahu, and whether you like Netanyahu or not, that's really your own decision. But when he draws a line in the sand, he means it. And what we can learn as a country, and this even goes back to the 60s and 70s, we need to have people who will respond. We don't need someone drawing a line in the sand and saying, "Oh, let me move that line back a little further. Oh, let me move it just a little further back, a little further back." So what does that do? That empowers these people to do whatever they want to do because they know there are no consequences. JFK brought the Russians to task with the Cuban Missile Crisis. But today, what crisis do you think Sleepy Joe Biden is going to bring to bay with Taiwan, with Hong Kong, with North Korea, with whoever? I mean, today maybe I'm a little long in the tooth, but I remember a time when the word America and American power meant something. Today, I'm not quite sure it means exactly the same thing. So these Democrats have got to be called to task, and the Republicans better grow a spine, let's put it that way, to be able to confront this, because if they don't, this is going to be a long, slow, hard journey into night.
So let me play off of something that Frank mentioned there, and it ties into the current rocket situation that we're having going on with Israel and the Palestinians. He talked about American power. Israel had been relatively peaceful. That whole conflict had actually been relatively peaceful under the Trump administration. Why is it that we're having this uptick 5 months or 4 months technically into the Biden administration? It happened literally as soon as Biden started making overtures to Iran. They saw that Biden was trying to undo everything that Trump had achieved in the Middle East, and so they started firing off these rockets. Now, don't get me wrong. Yes, the fact that they missed this last election, and that's usually, again, I think Ben Shapiro made a great point on this. Whenever something looks like it's about to happen, they lob some. Hamas wants to lob some rockets into Israel to sort of distract the Western media from saying things like, "Oh, hey, weren't y'all supposed to have an election? How did that go?" And stuff like that. And that is, I think, part of it. But I think the problem that we see is they're under Biden. America is not seen as strong. They saw those in the Middle East saw Trump as strong, and he backed it up. That's why he was able to get the Abraham Accords moving forward. Mm-hmm. That's why there were these things happening, because there was perceived American power. The problem isn't that we couldn't destroy the planet 9 times over. We absolutely could. We literally have the most powerful military that humanity has ever seen. But if we don't have the will to use it, then we might as well just have a bunch of babysitters on payroll. The problem is our current administration does not evoke power. It does not seem like it wants true stability. And so that is what I think the number one driving reason why the Palestinians think they can get away with this. They know that Trump's not going to show up and be like, "Okay, y'all done screwed up." They know they can get away with this. And to a point, Iran may have reached out to him and said, "Hey, do this for us." Because we have to remember, Hamas, a lot of these other Palestinian groups are actually just Iranian proxies. And that's another factor here. Is this just maybe more sort of okay? And this ties this in over here. Look at what's been going on. We've got Antifa and Black Lives Matter running around, destroying things, burning down buildings, killing people. And has the Biden administration cracked down on them? No, they've given them everything they wanted. This may be just more of the same, just on an international level.
So what I would say to this point, I mean, and I'm going to leave it to you and Frank to talk more from the op-ed side, the more political side, because I don't, as I see my position in this show, most of the time it's more the guy that's drawn by the historical implications or the social engagements, as our fans and family and friends know. What I would say is this: what you're talking about is the concept, whether it's appeasement or not. I think that you're looking at just a weakened. I mean, it's a policy that you've seen so many times before. Whether you saw it with Neville Chamberlain and the British in World War II trying to offset Hitler's aggression through Europe, whether you've seen it with the Obama administration utilizing the red line in the sand, whether you're seeing it with Biden now, whether it's him approaching the border with a posture of non-aggression or a posture of non-enforcement almost, whether you look at him with what he's doing with Iran with regard to re-engaging in talks, whether you look at it as his posture on Russia, which will be interesting to see how he's going to take this to the next level with regard to our recent what is being listed as they think with the news. It's still very new. Let's be careful that we're not just throwing around unverified facts, but this recent attack taking place on our oil fields in the East Coast. What I would say is sometimes, as much as you want to ideally see temperance and restraint as what's needed at times, I can understand and respect that posture. Sometimes bullies only respond to force. And I think that what you're seeing is the presence of a vacuum in the Middle East. And with that abandonment and realignment of this current administration from a completely polar opposite posture of the previous, you are empowering, as you guys were saying, a voice, whether it's domestically with Antifa or internationally with what we're seeing, that says, to Frank's point, well, what's the consequence? What consequence is coming? We'll see what's going to happen, because you're right. I don't think Netanyahu is the type that's going to stand by. And Israel has the power in that region to conduct itself accordingly. But remember, on the political side, you've already got representatives like Tlaib and Ilhan Omar that have openly come out. And they're not coming out in defiance. They're coming out in support of what they're seeing. With regard to some of now the way they word it is, well, Israel is calling this upon itself with its apartheid posture. There are approximately 8 million Jews in that area, and to the tune of 25 million Arabs in the area. One group is certainly the minority of the two, and I think it's interesting for us to consider, again, from my chair, that political side doesn't speak as loudly to me as the historical side. So one thing I want to do here is, if I can, I want to kick back over to Frank on this and say, Frank, do you see a correlation between not just what the Democrat Party role is, but do you see this presence taking place both on the domestic and international stages where appeasement or maybe a hopeful posture that things will change really contributing to anything that can be a positive outset, a positive relying result?
Well, from your lips to God's ears, I don't believe the Democratic Party, as we see it today, has the will, the motivation, the gumption, or the ability to give up their quest for power, which is so ingrained in them that they would sacrifice. Let's put it this way: they hated Trump more than they loved this country. So therefore, they would do anything, including running this country into the ground, both economically and internationally, in order to get their way. One of the things that was great about Netanyahu is that when the Arabs did something, when Hamas or Hezbollah did something, his reaction was instant and lethal. He did not pussyfoot around. He did not say, uh-oh, here come the Arabs again. What are we going to do? Let's call a convening. I mean, I can see Biden say, well, let's call a committee meeting. Let's get Lloyd Austin. Let's get all the boys in the house, and let's talk about it for the next month. Meantime, your country's being invaded, but, oh, wait a minute, we're going to talk about it some more. And that's the problem. They're so confused, or they're so conflicted with the idea of gaining power and to hell with everything else. That's what the problem is. Until that rights itself, there is something that happened historically. Actually, it's a work of fiction, and you probably would remember it, called 7 Days in May. 7 Days in May was a story about the U.S. military under the leadership of a general named Mattoon Scott. And what he did was he realized that when these, and I believe it was either the Chinese or the Koreans or someone, attacked one of our installations, and the president did nothing. He did nothing. And it was not the first time he'd done nothing. And the military decided that's it. They're going to take over. There's going to be a coup d'etat. And they had it all arranged by code signals and all this. And what was interesting about the story is you could sympathize or empathize or understand both sides. I mean, yes, you saw that they attacked a boat or they attacked a ship or a base or whatever. Do you go to war because of that? Well, in World War I, it was because of the Archduke that we went to. We brought the world into a conflagration that still people have not recovered from. And then World War II, the same thing. Is it worth it to go to war over something that, shall we say, insignificant? I mean, we did that in Vietnam at the Gulf of Tonkin, but then again, that was just another. It was another reason to go to war. I think Mr. Biden and the Democrats want another war. Why? Because of the military-industrial complex that will make billions of dollars. Because of the Facebooks and the Googles and the Twitter accounts that will just explode with Amazon. I mean, that's what they want? Well, yeah, because that's the power base they want. What do they do that to? The detriment of the country. And that's what 7 Days in May was all about. The end of the book was that the military was caught and Mattoon Scott was resigned and it came to an end. But believe me, if you take a look at that scenario again, just like you, Alex, you said, we have the most powerful military in the world. Who would stop our military with a concerted effort to overthrow the government? Who would stop it? Right now, I'm not sure even the American people would do that. So,
well, I think that's an interesting point. I'm going to jump on that real quickly, Alex. I think that's an interesting point that Frank raises, which is to say this: warfare is changing. So to the point of well, who would stop it? Bits and bytes, and a 17-year-old sitting in a closet with a laptop and a good internet service provider. I think that's something that shifts us where we're seeing the battlefield not only going to the digital landscape where it's been, not only going to the information landscape where it's won and lost in the hearts and minds of people, but you're seeing it now that the strike that a digital campaign can make upon a country. I mean, our if you saw the market today, it's no surprise. Yeah. Lost almost 500 points. At one point, it was down over 600. Why? I think that you're seeing, first off, there was tragic job numbers that came out. You're seeing policies that are not effective with regard to the government or to the economy itself naturally. But then you're starting to see security measures like these oil pipelines that are being attacked. Now, when you've got multiple pipelines that are running, you have multiple opportunities for alternative measures. But when you see ones that are shut down like this, you're already seeing in the news, American Airlines directly had to alter flight operations. This is a national security. This is impacting people's lives. And so I want to bring this up to say that leap that's been made, that transition, that bridge between international and domestic issues, I think has now been not only burned or transcended, I think it's been manipulated, shifted, and evolved into the new concept of the digital landscape. I mean, we literally could find out at the end of the day that this was a bunch of hackers sitting in somebody's basement that just shut down oil fields in the United States that stretch from Florida to the Carolinas and as far inland as almost, I think, Arkansas potentially.
Yeah.
So warfare itself is changing. The days of great battleships at sea, I don't know that is necessarily the future. So the question has to become, from your perspective, Alex, how do you see this landscape impacting the way that we address these issues? By the way, I just totally took over his role of the host. but how do you see that? How do you address that? This is no longer an issue about Hamas. It's no longer an issue about oil fields. It's no longer an issue about Xi. This is an issue about national security for countries across the world that are being fought through computer interfaces.
So here's the thing. At the end of the day, we don't even use battleships anymore. Not really. I mean, it's more with first strike capabilities, things like that. But there's always going to be a bullet, right?
Right.
No matter how many computers you can shut down, someone's got to show up with a gun, or they're just going to say, I don't care. There's only so much damage you can do. Now, can you do a lot of damage to infrastructure with computers? Yes, you can. It doesn't take much. It really doesn't. And that's kind of where we've been. And what a lot of people may not know is that you can actually watch all of these attacks taking place in real time. This stuff is actually sort of publicly out there. I would argue we've actually been in I don't even know you could call it a Cold War, but we've been in many ways, it's an active war with Russia and China and several other nations via the digital domain. You can argue that Russia basically is just moving through a lot of these smaller criminal hacker groups, and that's supposedly who shut down the pipeline. Or is this group that calls themselves the Dark Side? But really, a lot of this digital warfare is going on, and the problem is because things don't blow up, because we don't see dead bodies, we don't think of it as war, right? We're not used to the idea of information warfare, and that's where we're at. And in many ways, this all does tie together. Our inability to summon the resolve to do certain things, even how and who gets elected. Fifth generational warfare is information warfare. It's not just about shutting down oil pipelines and making power plants blow up and erasing tax information, which are all things that really could happen. Really, if you wanted to cripple us on a national level, if someone could shut down the stock market or the stock exchange for a week, you'd cause all kinds of chaos that would almost never be recovered from. But the problem is right now, Russia or China doesn't want that because they need that too, and they understand that. But this fifth generational warfare is about information. What we have to understand is that they are attacking our will to go to war, our will to drop bombs, our will to use the battleship, to your metaphor. Because again, having it is irrelevant if you're not going to pull the trigger. If I know you're not going to pull the trigger on the gun, I'm going to keep doing what I'm going to keep doing. China knows this. Russia knows this. That is why, look at how much our social media bends to the will of China. Look at how much our popular media bends to the will of China. They're trying to create, this is fifth generational war. This is information warfare. And what it ultimately means is, when it comes time for a real war against an enemy that we actually should be going up against, we're not going to have the willpower to do it. But to Frank's point, I think it's very well pointed out, we'll go to these tiny little wars, these little police actions all the time, every day, all over the world, to make a bunch of people a bunch of money. Not because we have any real interest there, not because there's anything strategically to be earned from that, but because it finances somebody else's campaign. It allows someone to sneak an extra couple $1 million under the mattress for consulting fees. We're happy to throw our children and billions of dollars at some country no one's ever heard of because somebody somewhere thinks we can make some cash on it. We're going to build buildings that are never going to get used in the middle of nowhere because somebody's cousin needs to get a contract. That's what the military, unfortunately, in many ways, that is what our military has become. It does, don't get me wrong, our military does amazing things. International commerce exists because our military exists. Europe has enjoyed peace for 60 years because of our military. But we're coming to an age where we have our political system is so fundamentally broken that we will not go to war with those with whom we should be going to war to protect our people, and we will go to war with people that mean nothing, so that we'll lose American lives, so that somebody in Washington can buy that bright, shiny new BMW.
So, first thing I'm going to say before we get sued by BMW, they make a beautiful car.
I love BMW. Although, you know what? I have to say, it's more of a Kia guy, though. Kia is really my business.
So until we go to war with South Korea, you're good to go.
Yeah, I'm good.
No, I think to that point. So we have an asset. We have someone in Frank here with us that can provide context and historical presence of being firsthand, present, ready. Let's turn this to the game show side. All right, let's do this. Frank, something, 1, 2, maybe 3 examples of policy, examples of government intervention, however you want to kind of direct the narrative. What have you seen previously? Let's, give us 2 topics, 2 subjects, or 2 examples where you saw American diplomacy, whether it's through the military, the government, or economics, that you felt pose a great model for us to maybe reconsider. And then in contrast to that, something maybe that you've seen that we need to create a drastic change from. Because the element of this show is creating conversation to create change, to create engagement. So can you give us that? Something you've seen that's worked, something that you think needs desperately to be changed.
Okay. How much time have I got?
Evidently not enough.
Okay. Interestingly enough, your question is answered in the same administration by the same individuals, both pro and con. And I do also want to bring up another book, historical reference now. The book is called, geez, it just blew out of my head. I'll think of it eventually. Anyway, the good point and the bad point. Let's look at the 2 of them. Number 1, what was the worst thing that happened in the last 100 years? Not 100, the last 60 years or so. And that was a little episode down in Cuba called the Bay of Pigs. Now, I happen to know the captain who, I knew him personally, who was the command and the fire control officer for the invasion of Cuba at the Bay of Pigs. He was one of the youngest commanders of an American battle group in American history. In fact, he was so young, his call sign was Little Boy Blue. He was there offshore in Cuba on the binoculars, watching what was happening, on the phone with Washington saying, "Sir, can I fire?" And the answer came back, no. We could have not only supported that invasion force, we could have eliminated Cuba. Obviously, we didn't want to do that because of all the good people that are there. But we had the power to do that. We didn't. And as a result, hundreds, if not thousands of young men and women were slaughtered. Now, there is an example of a bad policy. I can almost see a Joe Biden written all over something like that. Now, what about the good side? Same man, few months later, only we call this one the Cuban Missile Crisis. What happened there? Well, Nikita Khrushchev believed that he could hoodwink John Kennedy into not doing anything with setting up ICBMs 90 miles from Florida on Cuba. And what happened? There was a lot of gnashing of teeth and a lot of discussion back and forth. And finally, the decision was made by JFK. We will stand firm. And what happened? The Russians blinked. They turned around and went back. So there's 2 examples, same man, same administration, almost within a year of each other. One really bad, one really good. Now, does that happen very often? No, you don't really get tested that very often. But when those kind of tests comes, try to imagine in your own mind what would have happened if Kennedy had not caused the Russians to blink. What would have happened? We would have had a nuclear arsenal at our back door pointed at our throats. As it turns out, obviously we didn't have that. By the way, the book's name is Failsafe. And what's Failsafe? Failsafe is a story about the confrontation between the United States and Russia based on a computer program that told the United States that the Russians were arming for war. So we sent a tactical nuclear strike team with B-52s on the way to Russia to nuke Moscow. Back and forth, the president was on the phone with the Russian leader saying, "Oh, this is a mistake. This is a mistake. We're not really doing this." And he tried to recall the bombers. But because the bombers were told that don't believe anything that comes in orally from the president because it could be phony, don't believe it. So no matter what entreaties the president brought forward, those bombers went. And what did they do? They bombed, they eliminated, they eviscerated Moscow. What did the president do? Well, he did the only thing he thought he could do. He surrendered New York City to the Russians. New York City was eviscerated with nuclear weapons. What caused the problem? A plug fell out of the wall of a computer system and made it give the wrong information. That's what happened. Now, you'd say today how we're controlled by all these people who can write programs and hack this and hack that. Well, I have a lot more faith in the American people that we have a group of people somewhere that can eliminate that threat by eliminating those programs. If those programs can be written, then they can be unwritten. If they can be thought of, then they can be destroyed. And if we don't do that, then I agree with both of you. We're going to have an Armageddon that'll make World War I and II look like a cakewalk. Not so much as people being blown apart, but the financial, the economic, the financial, the industrial, the international, all the programs will collapse. Now, what would that really cause? If everything were to go away, I'm going to postulate this for your listeners and for you guys to think about, what would happen if the financial system of the world collapsed? What would happen? I don't know the answer to that. I'm just posing that as a question. What would happen?
Famine.
If
famine,
that happened?
Immediately. Famine.
And you're saying famine. What? The crops would what? Go back into the ground, and they would what? Just die? Why would there be famine? I mean, are the crops going to stop growing? Is the water going to stop watering? Is the rain going to stop falling? Why is famine going to happen? I mean, are we going to the four horsemen of the apocalypse? Are we going with war, pestilence, famine, and death? Because that's what's going to happen with a financial collapse?
No. Well, no. Well, this is the problem. Most people don't live near food. Like this is the miracle of modern society, is also its biggest potential weak point. If the financial markets collapse, you don't buy food. This is what happened with the Weimar Republic. But the Weimar Republic, which was just Germany, is basically is less than the size of Texas. Imagine again. Let's just use the United States. Let's forget about everywhere else for just a moment. If you're not going to get paid to move that grain from Kansas to California, it doesn't get moved. You're going to walk off. You're going to take care of yourself. If we can't get fuel from point A to point B, those trucks don't run. You can't buy the parts you need from overseas because we've shipped all that manufacturing overseas. We can't buy those parts. We can't fix those cars. We can't fix those trains. Financial collapse will result in famine, not because we can't grow food, but because we can't get food to market. Okay. And because now the farmer can't buy fuel. Now the farmer can't buy the tools he needs to fix that $100,000 tractor that he had to buy to be able to harvest that much grain. We don't live where the food is. Okay. And and when you have an economic collapse, that is what's going to happen. We see it in Zimbabwe every day.
Okay, Alex, let's go back 250,000 years when men and women were, beating each other over the head with clubs.
Yes.
And they were,
as we should.
Okay. I disavow that statement no matter what. Anyway, how did they survive? They survived by trade. In other words, I had an axe, you had a lamb. I'll give you my axe if you give me your lamb. Okay, here, let's make a trade. You see, there was a whole existence of mankind before money. I mean,
absolutely.
Actually lived. Now, you're talking about the farmer. Yes, he can't get it to market. But what if the guy that owns the truck place says, "Tell you what, I'll give you the truck. You give me the grain." Okay, you see what I mean? That money is just a medium of exchange. Anything else can be a medium of exchange also.
You're right. And bartering is something that would absolutely happen. But we have seen this happen in modern society. When you have a collapse, the problem is not everyone's going to be able to have something that they can exchange. You have to be able to exchange something to get that good. Now, is it going to mean hundreds of millions of people dying? No, of course not. That's not what it's going to mean. But will it mean famine? It will mean famine. If you can shut down and begin with this technological warfare, if you can shut down the flow of oil, meaning the flow of energy, if you can shut down, again, you can cause an economic collapse and no one's money is worth anything. The only people who are going to be able to survive are those who can actually barter things. Here's the problem. We got a lot of people who have no real practical skills. They're not raising chickens. They're not growing corn. They're not fixing cars. They're not manufacturing energy. Again, converting oil into gasoline so you can drive your car is a difficult and expensive process. If there's economic collapse, a lot of that's going to get real hard to get to. And again, if you can have hundreds of acres of wheat ready to harvest, but if you can't afford to put fuel in your tractor to harvest it, that goes fallow. So it's not going to get eaten.
Alex, I'm going to jump in here real quickly because it's as enjoyable as it is to sit here on the cast of the movie Wall Street and listen to the YouTube tycoons talk about the market structure. I'm going to play the guy on the sidelines that definitely doesn't know how to view it from that perspective. What I would say is this. Also, you said those who have the ability to barter. I'm going to be just fine because anybody who knows me knows I was a wicked baseball card trader. So I am going to be just fine. I will trade you 3 grains of rice. And by the end of the day, I will be driving in that BMW you were talking about earlier. I feel supremely confident about that. And I will pick up all of our friends and family. We'll go tooling around and we'll be fine. However, in the world of reality, what I would say is this. Somewhere between Frank's point and your point. Number one, from your side, if a market collapses and the world immediately falls into famine, then there's an inherent built-in safeguard that the world never fall into economic collapse. Secondly, from Frank's point about whether or not the average marketplace would then shift, migrate, adapt, evolve into something that's barter-based or something that it just doesn't, one day you go from trading options on the stock market to trading socks for ground pepper and corn. What I would say is I think that there's a lot more in the capitalist model and in the model that we occupy in our mentality that the market will shift and adjust. I don't know that it's going to happen quickly, but I think it would migrate into something that would be manageable still. Again, using that backdrop that if famine is the ultimate objective upon complete failure, then we have a built-in system that's all of us are mutually tied for it to not get to that point. But what I would also say is how many people are truly invested at a level on the marketplace, if you will, that they're going to see outside of the direct impact. Now, to your point, I don't think you have to own Chevron stock or Apple stock to be impacted when the bread lines start. What I think will happen is, yes, you're right, not just global distribution of petroleum products, but look what we saw in COVID. I mean, we saw things shutting down and people literally, you saw the grocery stores. They went empty within 24 hours everywhere, except now there could be even more risk because there's no delivery system. There's no infrastructure. And I mean, actual wink, actual infrastructure in place to run these things. But I do think listening to both Frank's perspective and your perspective, for those of us, again, who are not necessarily 100% in either direction, I would say I think it's important that we maintain some type of median response that maybe it doesn't go all the way to one side or another, and that the marketplace has enough stability and durability that it can adapt and possibly overcome and may even redesign itself.
Well, and also, Alex, I understand this, and Nick makes a good point, but a lot of people will say, well, hey, Frank, you're out of your mind. We had a depression in 1929. The banking system fell apart, and look what happened. How many people died? How many people lost everything? How many people jumped off roofs? How many people this and that? Yeah, that's true. Now, how long did it last? 9 years? 10 years? What pulled us out of it? A world war. Okay? There's always something that's going to end it one way or another. Now, those weren't good ways to end it necessarily, although I'm sure there's the industrial military complex that loved every minute of it. But the fact is, there was something that pulled us out of it. And that will happen again and again, because throughout history, that's what's happened. A lot of people talk about, I love today, you listen to these guys on TV saying, hedge yourself against money that's going to fall apart as the government prints more and buy gold. Buy gold because gold has been for 10,000 years has been something you can depend on. Well, who said so? Who decided that gold was really good? Why can't you make watermelon the exchange rate? Why does gold have to be? Because it's rare, it's precious, but so's palladium, and so is
Saffron.
Yeah, saffron. Saffron is more expensive. Saffron's more expensive than gold. So why do you have a gold standard? Why not a saffron standard? I mean,
could you imagine
that's what Bitcoin is. I mean, Bitcoin is just it's just digital gold. Same idea.
What'd you say?
That's what Bitcoin is. It's just digital currency. It is
another thing. Don't you love Bitcoin? Who says Bitcoins are worth anything?
Oh, exactly. It's money itself. And so here's the deal. I completely agree with you. Something will pull us out if there is a collapse. So there is nothing that I don't believe anything is ever 100% forever. But you ask, what's the result of a collapse? It's going to be famine. It's going to be all kinds of chaos. Will we come out of it? Of course we will. Yeah, well, but here's the thing: the Black Death happened for a while. We got through it. We got over it. The problem is does a while mean 5 years? Does it mean 100 years? Does it mean 500 years? The question. So the question becomes, what? Let's bring it all back to how again. What is it? What does it do with the cost of tea in China? Let's bring it back to why do the Palestinians feel it's okay to bomb the crap out of the Israelis? Because they know we're not going to do anything. Why is China and Russia investing so much in fifth generational warfare? Because they know that we will let them get away with it. So here's the problem, right? Back to Frank's point. Yeah, so they say we do have the fifth generational warfare. Everything collapses. We get out of it one way or another. Well, again, what if that collapse is all China needs to invade? What if that's all it's needed for the guns to back it up? It goes back to national security. All of these things are issues of national security. So my question to you, since you've actually hobnobbed with the knobs over at in Washington, here's my question: do you think any of them are actually bothering to care about any of this, or are they just looking at what's best for their wallet today? Are they even bothering to look 5 or 10 years down the road?
No, not now, because they don't have to. They don't have to because they're getting what they want because there's nobody stopping them.
Well, but I'm going to play play devil's advocate. Hold on, let's jump in here. Do we not believe? Are both of you stating that you don't believe that there is a single representative, regardless of party identification or whatnot, that doesn't have some type of deliberate intent that they're driving the attention towards these topics? That we literally have 100 senators with their head in the sand? That we have 435 representatives that are literally playing with balloons?
No, I'm not saying that at all. I'm saying you probably 70% of the senators and the Congress people are decent people. Maybe 65. Yeah, maybe 55.
Yeah. I'm up there
maybe
too.
20. But no, seriously, there's a good.
We're really good at statistics on this show.
that are decent people, and as a matter of fact, this last election with these numbers of young women and Asian Americans that got elected in some of these stronghold Democratic cities shows that there is a group of decent, moral, focused people who want the best for this country. But that 20%, that vocal, rabid 20% who have Antifa and BLM shooting people and killing people. And look at that Derek Chauvin trial. Those jurors were terrified to vote acquittal. I never saw such a vast verdict in my life on so many counts. It was incredible. Why? Some of them had pig's blood splashed on their doors. Others had phone calls that were threatening. What would you do, Alex? Would you vote to acquit? Are you that brave? Would you put your family into that position? Or would you just say, oh, well, we'll let this get by? See, that's what happens. We let it get by. Does it mean sacrifice? Yes. Are we willing to die for our beliefs? Well, we used to be. We're not that way anymore. Look at those young men. I think about the young men in World War II. You take a look at those pictures. Those guys are 18 years old. They're 19 years old. They're 20 years old. They're running up a beach in Normandy and getting shot to heavens, you know, but they're doing it because they believe in the goodness and the focus of this country, the greatness of America. They believe that. We don't have people like that anymore, except one place, in the military. The military today still has those young men and women, and God bless them because they're still there. Unfortunately, there's not enough of them, but they're still there. Unfortunately, their leadership are not the brightest bulbs in the box. You know, Lloyd Austin may be a very nice guy, but, you know, when he starts saying that now they've got to take a look at whether transgenders should serve and this and that, you know, be concerned about where the country's going, not whether or not you can wear dresses in public. So that's all I have to say about that.
Well, we're not short of any opinions, and that's always a good thing to share as we embrace the First Amendment. But I think what's important is that looking at some of these things, I think the consideration that has to be made, that has to be taken is a posture of, you know, as we say on the show every week, Alex, you know, so what does it mean? What do we do and where do we go from here? So if we're concerned about it, Frank, we have someone in you that has been around this world, that knows this world, that has spent time in DC. You know, we talk every week on the show. What can we do? What can we do? Where can we go? How can we do this? What are some baseline level tactics that we as citizens in this country can lawfully and logically and mindfully take in an effort to make sure that a lot of the values that many of us hold dear are respected? The freedom of speech, freedom of the Second Amendment, those of those wanting religious liberties to be able to pray as they want, for those to be identified, you know, wherever they are with respect and not being shouted down and having attacks come simply because of their opinions. And I mean all the way through the court system, through the voting system. What are some actual tangible tactical things that we can do as an electorate in this country?
There's one thing, just one. Learn to say no. No, I will not tolerate your bullying my children. No, I will not tolerate you holding up the vaccine. No, I will not tolerate BLM and Antifa getting away with burnings and killings and stuff. No, I won't tolerate that. And when we learn how to do that, you know, then the America that I grew up with back in the 50s and 60s, then that America will come back. She's here. She's still here. She's just a little bit quiet right now. Learn to say no, and by God, it'll come back.
And when we're working on that, what are some channels in addition that we can do through the actual governmental structure? Do you recommend reaching out to our congressmen, to our local school boards? You know, what are some actual channels that we can elicit change from the perspective of lobbying? You know,
okay.
What can we do?
Absolutely. There's one other thing we can do, and this is 2 words: term limits. When you have people like Senator Leahy from Connecticut, who's been in Congress so long, he doesn't know how to tie his shoes. I mean, the man is, you know, almost, well, let's say he's not the brightest bulb in the box. Chuck Grassley, Chuck Schumer, Mitch McConnell. You've got to get rid of these people who've been there 40, 50, 60 years and put it in with what our founding fathers said. They want a citizen government. You come in, you serve, couple of terms, you go home and you grow your crops. Now, you grow your crops, you know, you work in your job. But my point is, until we get term limits, this isn't going to stop. And can we get term limits? We're not going to get the congressmen and senators to do it themselves, but we can do it through the states. The states can bring it up with a constitutional amendment, and we can have that to the government. And we can have that to the Constitution. And that's what we need. So that you want to know those things we have to do? 1, learn how to say no. 2, adopt term limits.
I think that's some wisdom we can all embrace right there. I like it.
I'm going to ask the next level question. Who are we saying no to?
We're saying no to the people who say to you, "You're a racist. We need you. You are We need critical race theory. We need to tell people that America is a racist country, that we were founded in 1619 by racists, that we are a bad place. We're a terrible place that everybody in the world wants to get to. Kind of a paradox, isn't it? But that's who you say no to. The Nancy Pelosi's who come out with these unbelievable statements about, what Donald Trump did or didn't do. And yet Joe Biden, my God, old St. Joe and St. George Floyd and everybody's a saint. You want to be a saint? Tell you what you do. You get yourself in a conflict with a cop. You refuse to follow his orders. You attack the cop and let him beat you. Okay, you will now become a saint and we'll name a park after you.
I think that, I agree. I think that saying no means, this is a broader concept. It's actually saying no to people who are telling you to kneel to oppression.
Right.
That when they say you don't get to have, and I think the no here is more metaphorical, right? It's you don't get to have your own opinion. Yes, I do, and you don't get to tell me not to. We define who's racist and who isn't. No, you don't, because you are the racist.
Well, I think
it's actually I think ultimately what he's saying by no is let's actually stand up and speak the truth.
Well, and that's okay. I'm glad you said that part, Alex, because for me, that's the direction that I see it. What we're protesting for or against is that the ideals, the values, and the beliefs which we hold inherently true and hold as a value, as a belief, something that deep, that ingrained in your being, that is what it is that we say, no, I will not surrender that simply because you have a different opinion. It's okay to have a different opinion. It's okay to have a different perspective. But when you go to a point that you're challenging people on levels of reality, on levels of fundamental value systems, if you want to have a debate, the old saying, when I mean old saying, I mean, as of a couple of years ago, it used to be, though I may disagree with you, I will fight to the death for you to have a difference of opinion. Now it seems like there's almost, there couldn't be anything farther from the truth. And I think that we have to stop and say, you know what, this narrative that's being driven, I don't choose to embrace that, and I don't acknowledge that, and I don't recognize it as being accurate and factually true. So what I would say is, not only do we have tactical things that we can say no to, but we have deep spiritual, personal, and individual beliefs that we hold true that say things like respect for one another, the recognition of dignity of one another. And I think we need to get back there. And whether it's international, as we started the show off with, whether it's international attacks, whether it's domestic attacks, whatever it's happening, you can't follow this path indefinitely, because it will lead to a collapse in the worst thing of all, and that will be faith in one another. And that we cannot lose.
There was a guy a couple of years ago. His name was Tom Jefferson. You might remember him. He was the president quite a while ago. If you remember the last few words of his incredible document, the Declaration, in order to get this all to work, we all have to pledge our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor. You don't do that, you might as well just fold up the tent and go home. Because they understood what it meant, and they knew the sacrifice they were asking. Because in order to make this wonderful experiment continue, this greatest of all countries, ever since the beginning of time, there has never been a country like the United States. There never will be, because human nature is just not built that way. But God bless it, these people, these founding fathers who put together this country, understood that it meant their lives, it meant their fortunes, and it meant their honor, which they were willing to die for. And until that happens again, this is going to be a long, hard road.
Frank, I still want your badge.
Hey, what are you talking about, boy? You want my badge? You come and get it.
I want your badge on my desk right now, Frank. You went too far. You went too far this time.
For our listeners out there, I want you all to know I legitimately have no idea what's happening right now. Guys, good talk, good conversation. Alex, appreciate your time tonight. Thank you for flexing to our schedule. With the travel that's been going on and some upcoming changes. So I appreciate the support. To all of our fans and family and friends, thank you guys for paying attention.
What's a family?
We want to thank you guys so much for coming. And we share this with you. Thank you for your support of this channel. And like we always end every show, it's about getting out there and doing, not just talking, but taking those things that we do hold true and making sure that we are in a good position to help support and love one another, as I think we are all called to do.
So.
Beautiful words, Nick. Guys, we will see y'all next time. You probably at our same bat time and usual bat channel. Frank, thanks for coming on, and we'll see all of y'all next time.
My pleasure.
Be good.